Thank you everyone for joining us at APEC Meets Silicon Valley here at the Bay Area Council as we kick off APEC Week. Please welcome Bay Area Council CEO and President Jim Wunderman.
Morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. This is great. We've been waiting so long to do this. We've been talking for a full year about APEC since it was announced that San Francisco was named the host city by the United States and the president and President Biden and Secretary Blinken. And we worked really hard to bring APEC to San Francisco. And Bay Area Council was very much part of the team that convinced the United States government that this was the right place to hold it for all the right reasons. And we think that was a really great choice that America made. And now we've all been treated to the things that have happened in between to enable us to be able to actually do that. And tremendous amount of work by an amazing group of people has gone into that. And there's been a big partnership between the Bay Area Council and other groups, SF Travel, I won't name all the groups, and the city of San Francisco to make it happen. And we felt we should use the Klamath, our home and an incredible piece of San Francisco history and a great place for entertaining as an opportunity to proclaim APEC and have discussions about some of the serious global issues that present themselves. So that's what this is. Of course, you can't do things like this just because you want to do them. You have to have solid sponsorship and support. So the Bay Area Council is very fortunate to be an organization that has over 300 great members, many of you in this room, of course, who make the Bay Area Council possible and the work that we do. None more able, none more who stepped forward. And I just want to thank the team at Sutter Health as the major sponsor of APEC Meets California and Silicon Valley here on the Klamath. So please, we've been working with the Sutter team, and this is the first of a series of events over the next several days to really make the most. And I think some of I believe if you look at our agenda, some of the most important conversations are going to happen right here. So there's a lot of important conversations that are happening in Moscone Center and in other places in San Francisco. But as I look at this agenda, I think we're touching on the right things. So with that, this morning we're going to start on a really important subject, which is hydrogen as an energy source for the future. It's not a new concept, but the actual utilization of hydrogen is in an extremely early stage. This is my day job running the Bay Area Council, but my other job is I'm the chairman of the Water Emergency Transportation Authority, or WETA, which operates the larger part of the region's ferry system. And we are scheduled to unveil the first operating passenger hydrogen vessel, the Sea Change, at some time in the future. So we've acquired this vessel. Some of you are probably familiar with this, and we're still working on making sure that when she goes, she goes. And but there have been sea trials, and I think we're getting closer to the mark where we'll be able to unveil the vessel. It used to sit right on the other side of Pier 9. But I don't think it's there because I think the Secret Service made them move it. So, but it'll be back. So I just want to thank you for coming today. Again, thanks to Sutter Health for making this possible, the Bay Area Council team for enabling it. And with that, I'm going to ask the panelists to come on up and introduce our moderator, our incredible Senior Vice President, Adrian Covert, to lead the discussions. Come on up, panelists, and Adrian, and let's all listen in real carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. For our first discussion, bringing clean hydrogen to the world, please welcome to the stage Christy McKinney, Chief Operating Officer for the Port of Oakland, Hannah Brunig, Deputy Head of the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Systems Department at Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, and Megan Smith, Co-Leader of the Hydrogen, Atmospheric, Earth, and Energy Division at Lawrence Livermore National Labs, as well as our moderator, Adrian Covert, the Bay Area Council's Senior Vice President for Public Policy.
Thank you, Alex. It's Took about a minute out of my job, so thank you. Good morning, everybody. So happy to see you all today. We're having a great conversation today on hydrogen. Following this one, we're going to be talking about broader energy grid issues. We're really excited to have you here. So to set the table up, as many of you may know, California has adopted a net zero carbon emissions goal for 2045. This is among one of the most ambitious goals found anywhere else in the world. And to get it done, our Air Resources Board, CARB, has identified many different technologies and paths for us to get there. One of the more exciting ones is hydrogen. And we're going to be talking about hydrogen today, and we have a fantastic panel. So let me get into it here in a minute. First, I'm going to say that I'm going to address some questions individually to each of the panelists, but I invite you all to jump in at any time, and if you've got something that you really want to get in there, please do. Don't hesitate. And then we'll do that for about 40 minutes, and then I'll ask members of the audience to raise their hands and invite you to ask any questions to our panelists as well. So as we're going, think of the questions, put it up here, and then we'll get to you towards the end. So with that, let me start off with a question for Megan. So let's begin with some level setting. I think most people are very familiar with the basics of electricity and with internal combustion engines and with batteries, but hydrogen is an energy source they may be less familiar. So let's just start with the physics of what's going on in hydrogen energy. Where does it come from? How is it used as an energy source? How do you make it?
Okay. So I feel like a lot of discussions about hydrogen start with the fact that it's very small, because that is the truth. Hydrogen is small but mighty. So it's the most abundant element in our universe, but here where we live on the surface of the Earth, it's much less abundant. It does occur geologically and naturally underground, but for the quantities that we use currently and that we're scoping to use in the future, we have to produce it by other means. So the most common method of production right now is to react methane with steam and catalysts, and that produces carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide and the hydrogen that folks are looking for. I think in the future, the preferred method, or possibly a method that a lot of folks are looking into right now, is electrolysis, where instead you pass electric current through water to split that into hydrogen and oxygen. And so if people think of hydrogen as a fuel source, they probably associate it with rocket fuel, and that's true. Many of us here are looking into ways to use it for more light transportation, even regular vehicles on the road, but moving up to heavier forms of transportation, really looking towards the cargo, the shipping, and perhaps sustainable aviation fuels. It's a really important feedstock for a lot of chemical engineering processes, most notably ammonia fertilizer, which we all need in some way or another. And it can be used to provide industrial and even residential electricity, especially folks are looking into it as a way to meet peak demand. So.
Great, thank you for that. So you've got it found at various degrees around the planet, but electrolysis allows you to make it essentially everywhere. Mm-hmm. So as hydrogen becomes a greater share of the global energy portfolio, can we expect to find the emergence of a Saudi Arabia of hydrogen, or is it really dispersed?
I love this question. I think Saudi Arabia has stated that they would like to be the Saudi Arabia of hydrogen. But the beauty of this fuel source is that it can be produced anywhere, provided that you have the electrical resources and energy to run the processes you're interested in. And then I'll also say, one potential consideration would be, if you make it in large quantities, you may want to look for suitable places to store it, which could lead to some locations being thought of as better than others. But there's a variety of ways you could store hydrogen to make it accessible in most places.
Okay, great. So as it increases in space, there's going to be more security questions and safety questions, as with any scaled, fuel source. So let's address the Zeppelin in the room, pardon the pun. Talk about the safety of this, particularly in the application of vehicles, in which collisions are an inevitable part. So Hannah, do you have any thoughts on how safety has advanced in hydrogen transportation in the last 100 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So like any fuel system, we have to be mindful of the safety and engineering around it to be able to have it in large quantities working in our economy. How does it compare to gasoline or diesel or the things we might be replacing? Well, hydrogen is non-toxic, it's very flammable, it's non-corrosive. So there are challenges with how you store it that can be managed in terms of embrittlement of the materials around it. But the real question we have in terms of a vehicle, what would happen in the case of a collision? Well, like Megan pointed out, it's very light. In fact, it's 14 times lighter than air, about 57 times lighter than gasoline vapor. So the moment it's released, it's going at about 40 kilometers per second. It's so fast, it emits and it just disperses quickly. That is a safety advantage that companies like Toyota and Hyundai have been using to design the tank. In fact, there was a demo where they could shoot a bullet into the tank and then they would show what would happen. The things that we do have to be mindful of is it's extremely flammable. And so it also emits, if it's a gas phase, a flame that you cannot see, and it's odorless. So it's very challenging to detect flames. And it's also hard, unlike natural gas, where you can add an odorant. It's so light that it's hard to add an odorant because it can't even keep up with hydrogen. So there are some challenges with the safety that are being managed, but are also being taken very seriously.
So let's bring this now to California. And I want to stick with you, Hannah, for this question, and invite, of course, the other panelists to weigh in on this too. How is hydrogen currently viewed under California law and regulations? Do we have production targets under current state law to be manufacturing hydrogen by 2045 or another date?
Yeah, so breaking down that question, California views hydrogen as part of its portfolio for reaching carbon neutrality. It also is aware that it's going to need to scale it up by about 1,000 times production or more to be able to reach those targets. And it's particularly historically focused on zero emission vehicles or near zero emission vehicles, as well as the replacement of diesel. That was the origin. It's invested over $200 million just into electric vehicle refueling stations. It has very clear objectives for 2030, 2040, how many refueling stations it wants on the road. But we're seeing a huge transition in politics in California, moving away from light duty vehicles to really emphasizing where they think hydrogen can shine. And it's been incredible to see that turnaround as they see electric vehicles really taking off in the light duty market. They're really identifying hydrogen for diesel replacement, power replacement, ports, industry. And to keep up with that change in thinking, they are putting out new requirements for what's called an all government approach to strategically look at regulations, permitting, and everything needed to not only keep it safe, but expedite those processes. So really shifting and redirecting hydrogen to meet those goals. So if you look at just the legislator, you will see so many different new rules and regulations that are going around hydrogen.
And Christy, we'll get to you in a second. I want to hear your thoughts about how those rules and regulations are actually impacting real businesses and real industries. But first, Megan, do you have anything that you want to add to how you see the landscape of California's treatment of hydrogen and where it currently stands with respect to the other renewable sources that we have?
I would echo Hannah. We're ramping up. And I think California is taking a leadership position, but I was also looking at some of the other DOE hubs for hydrogen throughout the country. And I'm happy to see California's gained one of those hubs, and I'm really interested to see how that develops.
Okay, excellent, because I've got a question for you about that later. But first, while we're on the topic of how the state is treating and regulating hydrogen, let me ask you, Christy, about some of the best use cases. You represent the Port of Oakland. The Port of Oakland is the 6th largest port in the United States. It's a major employer here in the Bay Area, especially for the East Bay and for Oakland in particular. So this is a major part of the region's basic infrastructure and a core element to our trade. I think it's safe to say, and I think you would agree, hydrogen technology is a couple years behind battery and electric technology for certain applications that the port might use. On the other hand, the state is requiring major investments be made in the near term. So how do you balance the competing demands from the state to invest in net zero energy with the technology that's available today, knowing that hydrogen might not be there, but it's going to come soon?
Yeah, developing that roadmap is extremely challenging. And we kind of liken it to, most of you probably saw the movie Everything, Everywhere at Once. And we're really running everything in parallel. And actually, like the movie, it makes it a very exciting time. And hydrogen is really ramped up. We're the Port of Oakland. We have both the seaport you can see across the bay. We also have the Oakland Airport. We're also a public utility under the state of California. So we play in this space very seriously. And we're working with our tenants to figure out what equipment is going to make more sense to go hydrogen versus battery electric. If you think about it, if you looked at a port terminal, for example, a seaport terminal, you look at these giant pieces of equipment, they're lifting very heavy boxes, things like we call top picks. And you've seen these things probably operate, or you've seen them in your kids' books because kids love this stuff. And that kind of equipment really doesn't lend itself to battery electric. Batteries are very heavy. Batteries don't have enough power for those lifts. And the key is operations, right? This is a logistics business that we're in, whether you're in aviation or you're in seaports. Operations matter, time matters. So we can't just decide we're gonna, have twice as much equipment or park our equipment for hours and hours to charge. So for this equipment to make sense operationally, we're working with tenants now to work with OEMs, to work with the manufacturers for their preferred equipment and actually figure out how to make those hydrogen electric. So we're really kind of on the cutting edge with our tenants on that front. And we think that's a smart strategy, because if we spend too much money on battery electric and hydrogen finally advances to that stage in 5 years, 10 years, we'll have invested a lot in powering this other equipment and millions of dollars of making this equipment. Battery electric definitely has its place. But if you think about mobile sources or mobile vehicles powered, every time you have that battery with that extra weight, you're also using the battery energy just to move that battery around. So the more we can make it, I call it operationally drop-in, which hydrogen's more operationally drop-in. It feels more like I have a fuel tank, I go, I take my piece of equipment, I fuel it, I go back to work. The smoother that transition and easier that transition is gonna be.
So the hydrogen bagel's not quite ready yet. If you've seen the movie she referred to, you'd get the joke. Let's step back from California a little bit. So Congress last year awarded hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, through the Inflation Reduction Act to invest in the production of clean energies throughout the United States, including California. I'd like to know how the Inflation Reduction Act is impacting the hydrogen sector, and is California competitive for these grants? I've been hearing a lot of concern in Sacramento and in the national media, but particularly in Sacramento, about California and other blue states, ironically, not being as competitive for a lot of these grants as the red states have been, due to our over-processing, our too much process and the lack of speed with which we can get projects out the door. It's coming to bite us in the end. So how are we doing competitively in general, and also what impact is the IRA going to have on hydrogen in specific?
Well, we've won a lot of grants, so maybe I can speak to that first. This is mission critical. I mean, if I was sitting here and there was no IIJA or IRA, or frankly, what the state of California themselves have funded, I would be sitting here scratching my head trying to figure out how to make these projects that I'm talking about viable. Instead, we're actually moving forward on these projects. And in an interesting way, yes, California has the red tape. California also has already done a lot. So that's another potential reason for federal agencies to maybe look at another community that isn't as far along. So that's an interesting double-edged sword. At the same time, for this early money, California was better positioned than anybody because we already had roadmaps. We were already thinking about this. We had already studied the technologies. We were ready to put applications on the street immediately. Whereas if you were in Texas or you were in Louisiana or you were in some of these other places, you didn't even have an employee maybe who was thinking about this yet. So early on, we've done really well. I think it'll become more competitive as we go. Specific to hydrogen, California just won the hydrogen hub. So the Port of Oakland is the primary off-taker in that grant in Northern California. So we are working very closely, and I'm very excited about that. And I think that's going to leapfrog us forward.
And Megan and Hannah, please, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to continue that, I was on the group that wrote that proposal. And so we saw exactly what it took to identify producers, identify the connective infrastructure, and identify the offtake commitments. And we really created an ecosystem, a true hub. It's not just based on one technology. It's not just based on one company. It's really creating an ecosystem in a market that we demonstrated to the Department of Energy that we can have liftoff, basically meaning we have a positive net present value after a certain point in time. So that was really key to demonstrating that we're not just going to rely on that government kickstart. We're actually making sense in this area. And your starting point with the IRA is how is it helping scale up hydrogen? Well, I think one of the key challenges of hydrogen, the downside, is it's so costly to produce when you're doing it renewably. And what drives down that production cost point is manufacturing the electrolyzers, manufacturing the fuel cells that are using it, manufacturing all the systems at scale. And so that is why the infrastructure bill targeted production incentives. So you're getting credits for your capital, you're getting credits for every kilogram of hydrogen you're producing. That was done very intentionally by them. They also have put a lot of money towards early stage research to help improve the materials we're using, the degradation of the electrolyzers, the things that are really holding us back from helping just having the companies who are startups kind of solve all the problems themselves. So they understand there's still research needed. And so I'm really in that scene, and I've seen just how rapidly things are going. Yeah.
Oh, I guess I would point out too that there has been prior investment in materials compatibility research for hydrogen. Pardon me. And the impact of some of that, maybe if we can utilize some of our existing infrastructure as well, to what degree we can utilize our existing pipeline structures or other infrastructure that we already have in place that was previously used for natural gas, that also drives down the cost of implementation to some degree. So I think, I would say in California especially, but the DOE has recognized this and has laid the foundation here.
You know, let me follow up with you on the point about natural gas. I've heard in several conversations, I've heard there's a tremendous opportunity repurposing our natural gas pipelines, or if the pipelines don't work, the natural gas right-of-ways, at least as California communities start to transition businesses and homes away from natural gas in the buildings. So can you go into that in a little more detail? Can you just empty out a natural gas pipeline and start throwing hydrogen into it?
I would say probably not directly. You certainly wouldn't want to go to 100% hydrogen fuel through those pipelines. And so that's a really active area of research, is what is the correct blend that will ensure longevity and safety in those pipelines. I think repurposing any infrastructure is a question of safety first and then economics. If you want numbers, I probably shouldn't go on the record. It seems like a 20-80 blend might be the best at the moment. That seems to be what existing facilities could receive. Working your way up from that, right, increases the energy density of what you're transporting. But again, that's a materials compatibility issue.
Now, let's step outside of California and the United States, and let's talk internationally. where is the United States and California in hydrogen production relative to other countries in APEC or in the Eurozone on this issue? And have any other countries begun to implement anything on the order of the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of beginning to, having state investment in production capacity? Is that happening anywhere else?
I can speak to that quickly, and then it looks like Hannah has some ideas. But recently, there's a clean energy transition partnership that puts out calls for energy technology work. And almost every country on that list, which includes most of the EU, Horizon Europe, North America, and several Asian nations as well, have large, multi-million euro level commitments to hydrogen research.
I'll just note, if you set the big picture of familiarity with hydrogen, China produces and consumes the most, and it has for a very long time. It's fossil hydrogen. They also have very ambitious goals to ramp up their production of electrolyzers, so they are in the game big time. In terms of putting money on the table, the US, the European Union, Australia have all put substantial amounts into these hydrogen hubs, as well as really set the tone for leadership on the standardization of what clean hydrogen looks like and what international trade might need to look like, which is very good for de-risking investment. For example, there's a lot of countries in Africa that are very interested in exporting green ammonia or green hydrogen to Europe, or green steel produced from hydrogen, but they need those standards to be able to understand that there won't be any changes on the quality that they're sending. In terms of APEC, I see countries like Chile, Korea, Japan, Canada, the US really stepping in and starting to set ambitious targets for where they're going. And a lot of that is also coming from the driving down cost of solar and wind. That is really key on lowering that hydrogen production cost.
Now, out of all of those examples you mentioned, are there any key lessons for the United States in general, or California in particular?
I think the supply chain on the equipment is really key. We haven't talked that much about transporting, although you did mention storage. There are geologic forms for storing in very large capacity. Those aren't everywhere, so it's geographically limited. So we're limited to only a few methods to transport hydrogen via pipeline, compressed gas, or cooling it way down into cryogenic liquid. And one of the challenges we're starting to see in that area is there's only a few companies that really have a lot of experience with transporting hydrogen in large scales. And so there's going to be a little bit of this tension around who owns these valves, these compressors, what sensors are required. And I would say we need to see a little bit more collaboration on that front, and also ensuring there's no monopolies produced there.
Great answer, thank you. And then let's take that back, same question, but back to the United States. You mentioned earlier that Arches has 12 hubs throughout the US. Are they essentially working on the same thing, or is there some differentiation between how they're handling hydrogen opportunities? And how does that leave California standing with regards to the other 49 states?
Oh, I think when Arches is the name for the California hub, just to be clear, it's Alliance for Clean Hydrogen. So the Department of Energy has funded, to my understanding, 8 hubs, and they're located in different regions, and some of them are multiple states. California is a California-only state. However, we will be collaborating very closely with the hub that's up in Washington, as well as others. And so I think that's, you mentioned at the beginning, will there be a Saudi Arabia of hydrogen? I think these hubs speak to where it's just possible to produce hydrogen and store it with affordable wind or with the fossil fuels that you can do carbon capture on. So it really lends itself to that, as well as to some of the initial markets for ammonia in the Midwest. It just makes so much sense. Steel in the East Coast, it just makes so much sense. And in California, we're really pushing ports and diesel, and potentially things like aviation.
So let's say 20 years from now, hopefully earlier, 10 years from now, we overcome the transport and conveyance issues and the supply chain issues and the cost of the electrolyzer machines come down, and this really begins to scale and take root. What does a hydrogen economy look like for the average Californian? You pull up a hydrogen car to a hydrogen gas station, are pipelines, as you're driving down the freeway containing hydrogen? What does the physical landscape look like?
Well, I think I'll start at the port, because the port is actually on a much earlier timeline. So all of the container handling equipment has to be converted to zero emissions by 2030. So 2045 is some fantastical future date for us. We're going to be completely decarbonized and green well before then. So we're actually looking at on-site production, and thanks to Arches and the collaborations that they've pulled together and the different partners, we're already, I literally had a meeting yesterday about doing on-site generation using wastewater treatment plants. We have a wastewater treatment plant adjacent to the airport and the seaport, and we are a public utility, and we can produce green power. So I think you're going to see in this next decade a tremendous amount of localized innovation to make some of this happen. I'm going to let my colleagues here speak more to scale, which I'm less involved in. But I will say we are going to need to scale, because ultimately we are looking at shipping the actual ships, the vessels, and the aircraft, right? Really, that's where we need to get to. Those are the dominant sources in the whole logistics chain of carbon, of climate impact. So we just signed a green shipping corridor MOU with the Port of Yokohama, and we're really looking to sink our teeth in and get experience in that first green corridor, and working with partners to figure out how we actually green the whole system. Aviation, understandably, will be much further behind. If it takes us 5 years to get the 737 MAX recertified because of a software issue, that's just how we are with aviation, which is great. I appreciate it. It's a very safe business, but it's going to take us longer. But Airbus is already working on hydrogen, and so we're going to get there too. In the meantime, we have sustainable aviation fuel through biosources.
I'm going to follow up with you on the sustainable aviation fuel versus hydrogen. I think that's really fascinating. But first, Hannah or Megan, do you have anything you want to add on what the hydrogen world looks like for the average Californian?
Well, speaking into the future, I know that right now the Livermore lab maintains a fleet of hydrogen vehicles, and we rotate responsibilities to go fill the fuel tank. And it is a bit of a drive. So I would hope that into the future, it's a much shorter drive for folks who choose to operate their vehicles that way. I think the Bay Area has getting up to around 40 stations at the moment. Of course, it'll need to be orders of magnitude larger than that to approximate the ease in which people travel nowadays. But in some respects, I would hope that this looks somewhat similar to our current environment, in that, we routinely store natural gas underground all over the country and deliver it on a seasonal or even shorter time basis. And if we could implement that type of storage for hydrogen, it just moves into the mix.
So another question on the issue of cars using hydrogen. What kind of range do hydrogen vehicles get on a tank of hydrogen?
Let's see, I think we try not to go over 300 miles.
Okay, that's pretty competitive to an electric vehicle. 500? 500 miles. And does it take about the same amount of time to refuel the tank?
No, it's
5 minutes. Not the same amount, maybe a little longer. Now, quick follow-up question, Christy, on the issue of sustainable aviation fuel. So this is a big issue. Aviation makes up about 2 to 3% of global emissions. It's about 1% of emissions here in California. This is, there aren't a whole lot of options here, right? Batteries are not going to be flying airplanes anytime soon. So you've got sustainable aviation fuels, which are made from, vegetable oils and other oils that can be refined, and they reduce emissions compared to the baseline standard jet fuel by about 80%, if I'm right. And then you've got hydrogen, which, sustainable aviation fuels are already being produced. We've got a production facility in Southern California. There's some in the Bay Area. We hope to do more. So how is that going to work out, in your opinion, over the next couple decades, since you can drop sustainable aviation fuels into the current fleets? And I believe you would need a whole new kind of jet to fly hydrogen. Is that right?
Yeah, well, the jet might look pretty similar, but the innards would look a little bit different. But this is the challenge of the future of the world and humanity, right? I mean, I didn't own an iPhone most of my life. I've had 7 in, the last decade, right? And I'm about to go out and buy another one because the camera's better. So, I mean, the curve is steep and it's challenging. I mean, future generations of humans are going to be faced with a lot of change challenge, and that's what's happening. We have to invest in staff now, and we have staff in our tanks at Oakland, and we're working with our corporate, we have a large corporate presence at Oakland, and we're working with our corporations to see if we can get them to advance it even faster than the airlines themselves. But at the end of the day, that's got to be replaced, because that's actually not sustainable. If tomorrow I could snap my fingers and put everybody on sustainable aviation fuel that flies in the world, there isn't enough feedstock. There isn't enough sustainable feedstock. It's truly SAF. So we have to move towards something like hydrogen to make aviation really green, truly decarbonized. And we're going to have an intermediate stop, right? That's what's happening with battery electric. We might build a battery electric tug for the harbor now because that's doable, but ultimately it should probably be hydrogen, and we're going to have to get rid of that electric tug or repurpose it. So I see this curve being very challenging economically. We used to buy something and keep it for decades, and we've kept diesel fuel for a century, and we're just not going to be able to do that anymore. We're going to have to keep moving faster.
Maybe I could add one point here. We've talked a lot about decarbonizing, but the reason I work on hydrogen is for the environmental justice component of it. And it's particulate matter and other things coming from diesel combustion. That is what's killing people, causing heart disease, causing work loss. And the people who live around the highways and the emissions and the airports downwind of that, of the power plants, they are the ones who have the least amount of voice in politics. And hydrogen is amazing because it produces water when you use it. And it is really going to be critical for improving air quality in regions like LA and in countries around the world. And so there's a real advantage that the combustion of something that's produced from biomass but looks like traditional fuels and combusts like that, it's not providing a local benefit in the same way. So I just want to highlight that there's a real advantage there.
Yeah, you're here. I completely agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
So now for the last round of questions, and then we're going to move to questions from the audience. So again, think of what you'd like to ask our brilliant panelists. So if you were queen for a day of California or the United States, what one policy area would you change to help make hydrogen happen more quickly? Starting with
Well, I have an unsatisfying answer, which is that as a national lab employee, I do not advocate for policy. But I do think I would like to see a little bit more community voice in the energy mix that goes into the utilities that are available to the consumer. And I think that would go a long way in driving transitions that it seems that a majority of Americans are in favor of.
Yeah, I think right now, if I look at what I'm trying to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years, I need a lot more power right where I need it. And so I need the state to help me figure that out quickly. I'm actually figuring out the other pieces, but whether it's to charge battery electric vehicles or whether it's to produce hydrogen for hydrogen electric vehicles, power right now is the scarce resource.
I guess I would say requiring any industrial hub that currently uses a lot of hydrogen, a phase-in of 5 to 10 years of completely switching to just build up the market. So if you increase supply in really low-hanging fruit areas, potentially that'll help drive security and production. And so I'd say, in summary, that would be kind of securing offtake agreements between producers and suppliers And I think some of these companies are very capable of switching right away today.
Great. Okay, now, next question. What is the one thing that you think is overrated about hydrogen? What can't it do? Megan?
Well, it cannot be stored as densely as other fuels. However, we have engineers that have worked on these types of problems for centuries, so I'm not sure that's going to be the challenge we think it is, but I spend a lot of time thinking about that.
I'm going to leave it to the scientists.
I also work on hydrogen storage materials, and I would say hydrogen's really annoying. It doesn't behave well, it doesn't play well, it's hard to look at it, it's hard to even know how it interacts with surfaces. It's a really sneaky thing, and if it would just chill out, that would be great. Yeah.
Now, last question. What application has you most excited about hydrogen? We'll start this way.
All right.
Give you a break, Megan.
I'm really excited about the ports. I think it's an excellent opportunity. It's really good for communities. It's going to impact the economy because an incredible amount of what we buy and sell goes through the ports. It's just going to have such a clear impact. And I also think it's going to provide some comfort to other applications, such as all the drayage trucks coming in and out of there. If they see really heavy duty equipment operating just fine, I think that's going to build some confidence in it. So I'm really, really excited for the ports.
Yeah, well, I've got to echo that. And actually, I have a meeting later today with the West Oakland community. Obviously, we are neighbors. We are the same community. And so the drayage trucks are, we work collaboratively with them for what we're going to be applying for in the EPA grant. And they supported our grant application with Arches. So really getting that equipment converted that's on site now, because that is the equipment that is impacting the local community. And just so everybody's aware, on the electric side, we do plug in, every ship over there is plugged in as much as possible 24/7, unless they have some kind of failure on their side. We're all completely shore power. So that community component of getting that equipment converted faster is really our mission, before the deadlines, before the regulations, and helping our tenants do that. So I'm excited about that every day.
Yep, I support the work of the local hub as well. One thing I have been thinking about, though, that's a little further out, is I would love to see hydrogen energy linked to making some technologies that we're looking into for water treatment and wastewater treatment a little bit more viable. I think especially in California, but in many other places, right? We have pressing water issues, and we have technologies that do a wonderful job of ensuring that everyone has access to clean water, but they are at this point very energy intensive. So,
and you know what? We're going to be getting into the water energy nexus in the next panel. So to hear more about that, be sure you stick around. Now I want to turn it over to you. Does anyone have any questions for our panelists? Please raise your hand. Yes, right over here. Gentleman in the red shirt. I think you got a microphone coming, if you don't mind.
This was very informative, and we're very blessed in Northern California to have the world's premier laboratory devoted to energy research. And I look forward to the day when Lawrence Livermore developed fusion techniques will give us ultra green hydrogen, and you'll have solved the transportation issues by then. Question, coming back to the APEC aspect of things, one other country that was not mentioned, which should be considered in the APEC equation, is India, which probably has the cheapest solar power in the world right now. And in fact, we have one client that is receiving several $1 billion of sovereign wealth funding that's specializing in green hydrogen and is signing up deals with Europe and elsewhere. And that brings me to the sort of the specific question here. Another APEC member, Japan, has lofty goals, but has very little capacity for renewables, just given space and other constraints. Initially, you had started off talking about is there going to be a Saudi Arabia of hydrogen? Given the fact that in California, we don't have huge industrial uses, and there's kind of a mismatch that way, what degree of confidence do you have? I know it sounds very challenging in the ability to resolve some of the transportation issues so that California could become, at least for parts of the Asia Pacific, at least a mini Saudi Arabia of hydrogen.
Yeah, maybe a Venezuela of hydrogen. I tried. Good question.
I take it that was a non-political comment.
Yeah, non-political. Smaller in Saudi Arabia.
Well, I just, again, we are working very closely with Japan. We went on the state's delegation there. They've come here and they just came back and we all met in Southern California and signed these green shipping corridors. So we certainly intend to work closely with the Japanese government and the transportation ministry on hydrogen specifically, whether that means that we're going to be producing hydrogen here and exporting it, whether we're just selling it here locally for their ships that come here, and what their interests are in producing it as well. That's all kind of to be discussed and determined. A lot of the car vessels, we call them ro-ro, they roll on, roll off. So that at Benicia, a lot of the cars from Japan come into the bay that are imported, and they're looking first at converting that to hydrogen and maybe doing California out in Stockton hydrogen production out of ammonia. So that's maybe an early, beginnings of some of what you're talking about.
Great, and a question right over here. Gentleman with the blue shirt.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot for the panel. That was very informative. I have a question as it relates to trade-offs with hydrogen and, say, some alternatives. And so when you think about hydrogen, really difficult to store, really difficult to monitor, really difficult to transport. With electrolysis, a tremendous amount of electricity needs to go in there. And so I'm curious on the panel's view about the general state's preference to not look at, say, methane pyrolysis as an example. In methane pyrolysis, you're taking natural gas and converting into hydrogen for the audience. I'm just kind of curious to get your thoughts on, like, while it's not perfect in a lot of ways because of upstream methane emissions, it seems like that might be an easier solve than some of the alternatives. So just kind of curious how you guys think about those trade-offs.
Maybe I could take that. Yeah, so the way I'm seeing things move on the research front as well as the policy front is being a bit agnostic to actually the feedstock source, as long as you can meet your carbon intensity target. And so if methane pyrolysis with CO2 capture can meet that target, there's a low carbon fuel standard pathway for it. So that's what makes it competitive. And so it's kind of a fair game right now, is like, if you can hit the targets, you're going to get some incentives for it, and that's going to affect your price of hydrogen. So I really see it like that. Pyrolysis is having some issues still with its scale up. There's issues with tarring and things. And so I think there's still some hurdles and challenges to go. But you're absolutely right. There are lots of ways to make hydrogen. And one that I care very deeply about is hydrogen from biomass, because any carbon emitted is coming from that biomass. And if you capture that carbon and then you make hydrogen, you have a negative, potentially a negative fuel. There's a lot of questions around that life cycle because it's biologic matter, but I think we're getting to a point where we really can create these tracking systems for the carbon accounting.
And in a state where we have as large of an agriculture sector as we do every year in the Central Valley, producing huge amounts of bone-dry tonnage of biomass, and forestry goals to be clearing and processing 1 million acres every year of forest landscape for the next decade to reduce wildfire risk, there seems, I agree, a huge opportunity in using biomass. A question over here. Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for a very interesting panel.
Let me get this microphone for you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, from the outside, looking from the outside, California. I live in Europe, although I'm from California, so I follow my home state's affairs as closely as I can. And there's a lot of news about your power grid here and the sort of the drive to introduce more and more renewables and net zero goals. And do you keep Diablo Canyon going or not in order to maintain some reliability in your system. What I'm wondering is, what sort of capacity needs do you see in terms of electricity production, going forward in order to achieve this sort of hydrogen vision that you're talking about? I mean, in a state that's grappling as it is with just its ordinary needs for electricity in terms of running the economy, and you're talking about a lot more capacity just to produce an energy vector like hydrogen.
I mean, I'm happy to take a little bit of that question. So there's already, where you're talking about a context in a state where we have a large amount of renewables and we have a large amount of what's called curtailment. So matching the renewables, the wind and solar, with when time of use is happening, that means there's times of the day, like peak midday, where there's excess electricity being produced, and right now it's just being wasted. And so that's called curtailment. And there is an opportunity for leveraging that and using it for hydrogen that is under discussion. So that would be, without even putting on more capacity onto the grid, an opportunity and low-hanging fruit. But then when you actually look at what someone mentioned earlier, it takes a lot of electricity to run electrolyzers. You might have 100 megawatts of electrolyzers, and to power that might be 300 to 500 megawatts of PV panels. So that's, kind of like a medium to large scale facility producing tons of hydrogen per day. And so we need the space for that, the water for that. And the benefit of it, having dedicated renewables, is you aren't waiting 10 years to get an interconnection with the grid, which is a serious problem in the United States. And so there's an advantage of having that renewables come into the economy very quickly through that mechanism.
Could I just follow up with that though, on the curtailment? Isn't there, and this is obviously, you guys know this better than I do, but I understand with the current level of technology with electrolyzers, there's an issue with their degradement if there's not a sort of continuous supply of electricity. If it's going on and off, then they degrade a lot more quickly. So that if you're just relying on curtailed electricity production, the electrolyzers are going to degrade more quickly than they would if the supply of electricity was continuous. Is that true or not?
That's a great point. And I think that's what we're all hoping to get a lot of data on with these hydrogen hubs coming. We really need to see the demos and understand how we can play with that. Like Megan was mentioning, the blend into a fuel pipe. We have theoretical expectations and thoughts and analysis and models, but at the end of the day, we need to actually do it and see how it looks. And that can help us then set targets for material research. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're looking at a very small scale, but doing a demonstration around that where seaports are very peaky. So we have to basically have on tap this very large amount of power, but a lot of the day we're not using it. And similarly, as we expand solar and what have you, and have curtailment depending on the situation of where it's located, we're looking at taking all that power off peak, producing hydrogen. And we can actually use that hydrogen in some of the equipment I talked about earlier, but whatever we don't need for off-taking as hydrogen, we can then produce electricity during our peak with it. So we're gonna, I think we're in the experimental stage around all of those things, but we're looking to do that on a small scale.
I believe we've got time for one more question, and I think the gentleman here has the mic.
Hi, Ben Levy, UCSF. I'm just wondering about this use of hydrogen in the pipeline at 20%, because it's only going to be about 5% by BTU, I guess, or in terms of energy density, right? Versus natural gas. But secondly, I'm just wondering if you're just sustaining the use of natural gas overall by doing that.
Well, to your second question, I think there's always going to be a transition. Hydrogen has the potential to be the larger energy transition, and I think that's what we're here talking about today. We probably can't avoid the period where we're still supporting the use of some fossil fuels while we move towards that. And as to the specific 20% number, honestly, I pulled that out of some work that we've been looking at. It's a real, as Hannah mentioned, it's so difficult to work with. So there's many trade-off about losses to pipeline materials, escape through other losses within a storage unit. So that kind of seemed to be a sweet spot for some energy recovery based on also the amount of produced hydrogen gas from a geologic storage reservoir that could be accepted, upstream of that reservoir. I would imagine that that number is probably very specific to a local region, what their energy operators want and what the storage situation makes sense economically.
And
so please don't take 20 as a rule.
I would just add, I also had a little bit of that. I need to do a sanity check on the volume and the energy density and how much hydrogen versus natural gas you're using. So I was like, yeah, if I'm turning my burner on, my natural gas burner, and it's got a certain amount of hydrogen, am I actually using more natural gas in the end? And the answer is no, you would not be. And so that was like, okay. So there are some sanity checks with the energy density that do need to be, that have been done, yeah.
Okay, and I think we're going to try to squeeze in one more question. I saw a hand over here. Yes, miss.
I'll just relate to the topic, APEC. China right now is the largest producer of green hydrogen and hydrogen. This is just my statement.
Okay, thank you. Oh, since that was a short one, we'll do one more. Thank you for the comment.
That's why I thought I'd throw my hand up since you squeeze a little more time. I was interested, Hannah, when you mentioned the environmental justice community, because unfortunately they seem to be not in favor of hydrogen at the legislative level. The group SEHA has raised a lot of issues. Maybe it's some of the issues that the gentleman from the university has. What do you think can be done to help, frankly, I think, educate them about the benefits and why it actually would be better for the community? What are some of the problems and opportunities there to help turn that around?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's not just about coming and saying we're going to be educating you, it's also hearing what their legitimate concerns are. And I think they have some very fair, legitimate concerns. And I can say in the process of doing this proposal for the hub, we've been spending about 2 years in back and forth communications with environmental justice groups. Each one is different, each one has their own perspective, and each one has their own regional agenda. And so this is something that we didn't try to walk in as scientists and understand. We actually hired people who've been working with them for decades already to be the campaign. And so yes, education is going to be very clear. It's also about identifying people who can create that alliance, who understand what their needs are, who can help us do a better job. So some of the things that came out of that were understanding prioritizing buses might be more important than what something else we might want to prioritize. Looking at earthquake risk and really understanding what that means might be worth prioritizing, and we did that. So the community benefits, making sure the dollars going into hydrogen are going to actual benefits within the next 10 years, I think is one of the most important things we have to do. Like, we have to put buses on the road. If they don't see that change, they're not going to feel like there's any benefit coming to them. And there's just going to be a risk of hydrogen bombs in their backyard. And so I think we need to be very sensitive and strategic with that and not just view it as something we have to deal with. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah, and we face this regularly with our discussions in our community, and there is a lot of debate within the community. And in fact, I think a big part of another big issue for them is this feeling that it perpetuates the fossil fuel industry, that they're the ones who are really going to be successful in the hydrogen game. And so, and yet I think the lot of that is the larger .orgs. The actual community members who are going to see local air quality benefits are a little bit more supportive. So it is addressing, it's listening and hearing those and addressing. We've put green hydrogen at the fore of our grant proposals, for example, so that we are assuring them that, that's not going to be perpetuating the fossil fuel industry. We can do that on this micro scale. Obviously it's a different thing when you're looking at the large scale of all the research. But
well, thank you for the question. I think that's a great place to leave us and leave the conversation. So for Bay Area Council members and for non-members, we keep these conversations going through our various climate and energy and water committees, and you're invited to join and engage on those if you aren't already. Talk to me or one of my colleagues. And with that, I invite you to stick around for our energy panel, which is going to be happening in just 15 minutes. We're going to do a quick break. And also on Thursday, we're going to be doing a panel specifically on sustainable aviation fuels. So that's Thursday afternoon. So if you're interested in that topic, I recommend sticking around for that. So with that, please give me a hand and thanks and gratitude for our panel.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. The next panel will start in about 15 minutes. Please feel free to join us in the break room. And for anybody who hasn't gotten their sea legs yet, there are some wristbands at the front of the boat that will help with that a little bit.